When I was a kid growing up in the early 2010s, I loved Megamind. I thought it was a fun movie, I would watch it all the time, and I really hoped that it would go on to become a bigger franchise and become one of DreamWorks' staple franchises alongside Shrek, Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, and How to Train Your Dragon. Unfortunately though, that ended up never happening. The film would just become largely forgotten about for a long time throughout most of the 2010s. It wouldn't be until the early 2020s where the film would start to get more attention. It would receive a critical re-evaluation of sorts. Now the movie is seen as one of the best DreamWorks movies and an extremely underrated movie in their filmography. A big part of the critical re-evaluation for this movie would come from how it subverts the superhero genre in terms of how it treats the whole classic superhero versus supervillain trope. It left people wanting to see more of Megamind. It left people wanting to see a sequel, a follow-up of sorts happen for Megamind. People wanted to see Megamind come back. They wanted to see this underrated DreamWorks movie make a comeback in some way, shape, or form. And alas, it did. Sometime in 2022, I believe, it was announced that a new Megamind TV series would be made for Peacock. The show would follow Megamind trying to become an influencer, which, okay, that's not exactly what we expected out of a Megamind follow-up, but sure, okay, let them cook, maybe they can subvert our expectations. And then after that, there would just be complete radio silence, no updates or anything like that regarding the future of Megamind. That all changed very recently. A few days ago, a trailer for a new Megamind project was released. Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. Now, when this trailer first came out, I saw a lot of people were not happy with this at all. A lot of people criticized this trailer, and at first I didn't necessarily understood why. Let me explain. The two main points of criticism that people had with the trailer were, number one, the animation quality was very inferior to the animation quality for the original movie, and number two, none of the voice actors for the original movie reprised their role for this. Like Will Ferrell, for example, doesn't reprise the role of Megamind in this, even though he voiced the character in the first movie. Here's the thing, here's why I didn't mind this at first. I thought that this was a trailer for the influencer show that I brought up, and I was willing to give it a pass because of that. I was okay with the cheaper quality animation because this is a TV show, and so naturally the animation isn't going to be as high quality when compared to the movie. Like, you think about that Penguins of Madagascar cartoon from Nickelodeon, like you compare the animation of that to the animation of the real Madagascar movies, and you're gonna notice the animation quality for the Madagascar movies are much higher quality. The Penguins of Madagascar was intended to be a TV show and not a movie. It had a significantly lower budget, therefore the animation quality wouldn't be as good as the movies. And then the same thing kind of goes with the voice actors not reprising their role. This is a common thing for cartoons based on animated movies, where if a celebrity voices the main character of the movie, they're most likely not going to reprise the role. Like, if DreamWorks ever made a Shrek cartoon, I don't think they would get Mike Myers back to reprise the role. They would get someone that sounds like Mike Myers. They wouldn't get Eddie Murphy to voice Donkey again. They would instead get someone else to voice Donkey. They would get someone else who sounds like Cameron Diaz to voice Fiona instead of Cameron Diaz herself, etc. They do that because it costs a lot more money to get the original celebrity voice actors from the movie for this show. You could just hire people that they sound like the original celebrity voice actors. So initially, I was okay with Will Ferrell not reprising the role. I will say that, like, the voice for Megamind in this sounds nothing like Will Ferrell. Like, there's not even an attempt to make it sound like the original voice for the character, but I was willing to let that slide. So initially, I didn't understand why people were so heavily against this trailer. And then I realized something. This is not the TV show that I brought up earlier, the influencer one. You know what this is? This is a fucking sequel to Megamind. This is an official Megamind 2. After all these years, we finally have it. And this is when I went from being perfectly fine with the inferior quality of this when compared to the first movie, to just being actually kind of insulted in a way. All of a sudden, I realized why people had a problem with the much cheaper looking animation. Because this is supposed to be a sequel and not the TV show. The TV show is still happening. It's called Megamind Rules, but this trailer is solely for the sequel and not the TV show. Only at the very end is the TV show reference. All of a sudden, I understood why people were mad now. Megamind deserves better than this. I get that this isn't a theatrical sequel and it's instead going straight to a streaming service, but still, that doesn't mean it should have this much cheaper looking animation. A sequel to Megamind should not have the same animation quality as that one crappy ladybug superhero cartoon. Like, how could you do this to my goat, really? How could you do this? I'm actually insulted, I'm not gonna lie. There's also the fact as well that the movie just looks like just extremely generic. None of the charm or themes that the first film had is going to be present in this movie. It's just going to feel like a very safe kids movie. Let me explain why the first Megamind worked. Let me explain why it received a critical re-evaluation all these years later. Megamind takes the classic superhero versus supervillain trope and does something interesting with it. Usually, the superhero versus supervillain trope is just the superhero beats the supervillain. Megamind, however, does something different. It shows Megamind, the supervillain, defeating Metro Man, the superhero. And now Megamind is able to take over Metro City and do whatever he wants with it. Eventually, though, he grows bored of doing it. He starts questioning if it was worth it or not. He starts to miss the good old days when his plans would be thwarted by Metro Man. And that's what motivates him to try and create a new superhero. Megamind is one of those movies where it's like, you really like it when you're a kid, but when you're much older, you are able to appreciate it a lot more. And I think that's why it took so long for the movie to get the acclaim that it has now, because this is an interesting take on the superhero versus supervillain trope, showing the supervillain beating the superhero and then just going on to regret doing so, wanting the good old days to come back where the superhero would thwart the supervillain's plan and save the day. It feels fresh and unique, and considering the fact that we're living in a time where superhero movies are now being criticized for being very formulaic and unoriginal, most movies coming out nowadays, most superhero movies coming out are just very, just the same stuff over and over, copy, paste, cookie cutter garbage. That just makes Megamind feel even more fresh and unique than it did before, back in 2010. And so Megamind 2 over here is just gonna throw all of that away. The clever twist on the whole superhero versus supervillain stuff that the first movie had, you're not gonna see that in this movie. This movie is going to feel a lot more safe and generic. None of the charm or anything like that that the first film had, none of that is going to be present in this movie. It's just going to feel like a safe movie made for kids. That's another thing as well. The first Megamind is a movie that like anyone could enjoy regardless of age, whereas this movie feels like it's like explicitly for a younger demographic. Again, as I said before, the first Megamind is a movie where it's like, you appreciate it more when you're an adult compared to when you're a kid. You don't really get to appreciate the film's clever twist on the superhero versus supervillain trope until you're much older. The scene where Megamind ponders whether it was worth it defeating Metro Man and having Metro City all to himself or not, that's like, it hits harder when you're older. You're able to appreciate it a lot more. You think it's good when you're a kid, but like when you're older, it feels a lot more different. It hits differently. And there's gonna be nothing like that in this sequel. It's just gonna feel like a very safe, bland kids movie. So the movie follows Megamind trying to stop a group of supervillains known as the Doom Syndicate, who still believe that Megamind is evil. They don't know that Megamind became a superhero. In the trailer, it's mentioned that the Doom Syndicate is apparently an old crew that Megamind used to have, which is just, that's just retconning the first film as well. That's just retconning an important detail that the first movie had. Megamind alongside Minion were sent to Earth because his own planet was about to be destroyed. Metro Man would go through something similar, but with significant differences. Metro Man would grow up in a nice mansion, while Megamind would grow up in a prison. When the time came for the two of them to go to school, Megamind would often be the butt of jokes within the class, while Metro Man would be the one to do all the good stuff, do the right thing and whatnot. Megamind would often be picked on by all the other kids, and that's what causes Megamind to become the villain that he is today. He never had a supervillain crew. He doesn't need a supervillain crew. It's just him and Minion, and that's it. That's kind of what makes the first film work, and that's just them retconning an important detail from the first movie, just for what? Like, I don't get it. You know, to be honest, I'm not even 100% against the idea of the movie, where it's like, Megamind comes across a group of villains that still think he's evil, and so he tries to stop them. Like, that could work in a way. If it weren't for the severe retconning of the first movie, I would be okay with this idea. I would find it to be a pretty decent idea for a Megamind sequel. You know, while looking at this movie, I couldn't help but notice that it shared a lot of similarities to The Incredibles 2. Obviously, there are a lot of differences between the two movies, but there's also a lot of similarities as well. The Incredibles and Megamind are both animated movies about superheroes that are widely regarded as some of the best movies to come out of the respective animation studios that made them. The Incredibles is considered one of Pixar's greatest movies, while Megamind is considered one of DreamWorks' greatest movies. Despite this though, it would take them years to make a sequel to both movies. And in the time between both first movies and both second movies, we would receive a lot of questionable sequels instead. For Pixar, we received Cars 2 and Cars 3 before Incredibles 2. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Cars 3 is a pretty good movie. In some instances, I think it's actually better than Incredibles 2. I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion or not, but I'm just gonna throw that out there. But still, regardless, it's ridiculous to me how Pixar decided to make a trilogy of Cars movies before an Incredibles 2. Likewise, DreamWorks decided, nah, we're not gonna make a Megamind 2. Let's make Boss Baby 2, Trolls 2, and Trolls 3 before we make Megamind 2. Now, to be fair, there is a slight difference between the first Incredibles and the first Megamind. When The Incredibles first came out, it was instantly a success. It received widespread critical acclaim, and it made a lot of money at the box office. It was the fourth highest grossing film of 2004, and it was seen as an instant classic. In contrast, Megamind was always seen as a good movie, but nobody really cared about it all that much initially. It did okay at the box office, I suppose, but it was one of DreamWorks' lowest grossing films of the 2010s. And there was a little bit of criticism at the time for the movie, because many believed it to be unoriginal and derivative of other animated superhero movies. Especially considering the fact that a few months before Megamind came out, you had Despicable Me, another animated movie about a supervillain. One reviewer of Megamind even asked, do we really need Megamind when Despicable Me is around? Now, this would be the part where I would say, how dare you, to that reviewer, but considering the fact that the first Despicable Me is a legitimately great movie that I have a lot of nostalgia for, I'm not gonna do that. Consider yourself lucky, reviewer. Consider yourself lucky. It wouldn't be until the early 2020s where Megamind's popularity would start to increase. During this time, the film would receive a critical re-evaluation, as well as, I guess you could say, a cult following, with many people now considering it to be this underrated gem within DreamWorks' filmography. Combine that with the fact that the first Trolls and the first Boss Baby were pretty successful movies, definitely more successful than the first Megamind. It does, in a way, kind of make sense that they would receive sequels before Megamind did, in which case I have no idea why it took so long for Pixar to make Incredibles 2, considering the fact that the first movie was wildly successful, but that's beside the point. But the main similarity that I'm trying to say is, yeah, it took forever for both of these movies to come out. It would take years for them to come out, over 10 years. As a matter of fact, this is when the similarities between the two movies get a little more interesting, I would say. The Incredibles came out in November of 2004, while Incredibles 2 would come out in June of 2018. That's 13 years apart. Megamind would come out in November of 2010, while Megamind 2 is expected to come out in March of 2024, which is again 13 years apart. Yikes. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I hope Beyond the Spider-Verse doesn't come out in 2036, because I don't think I could handle this happening for a third time. No thank you. Considering the fact that we had to wait over 10 years for both of these movies to come out, our expectations would be justifiably high for both of these movies. It's understandable that we would expect both of these movies to be just as good as, if not better, than their predecessors. And for both movies to just end up being disappointing and underwhelming, it hurts, honestly. Like, both of these deserve better. The Incredibles and Megamind, they both deserve better, seriously. To be fair though, even though Incredibles 2 is a much inferior film when compared to Incredibles 1, it's still decent for what it is. There's still a lot of things to like about Incredibles 2. And yeah, Megamind 2 is not going to be good, but at the same time, it's probably just going to be a very safe, generic movie for kids. I don't think there's going to be anything offensively bad about it at all. But the main thing is, a sequel to The Incredibles and a sequel to Megamind, they should be amazing. They should be just as good as, if not better, than the first Incredibles and Megamind. Something I realized as well regarding the first movies for The Incredibles and Megamind versus their sequels is the time period that these movies came out in. The Incredibles came out in 2004. It came out during a time when superhero movies were considerably much more niche when compared to nowadays. Like, I think during that time, the only successful, notable superhero movies that were released around that time were the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies, in which case there were only 2 of each when The Incredibles first came out. It's also important to note that The Incredibles obviously came out long before 2008, when both The Dark Knight and Iron Man would come out and just completely change the superhero movie scene. Incredibles 2, in comparison, version came out in 2018. By that time, superhero movies were arguably at their peak, like the MCU and whatnot, it was like at its peak, and so as a result of it, it just doesn't really feel special. I feel like the more lighthearted tone that Incredibles 2 has when compared to Incredibles 1's darker tone comes from how superhero movies were in 2018 when compared to how they were in 2004. And then moving on from that, you have Megamind, which came out in 2010, which, yeah, that was after Iron Man and The Dark Knight changed the superhero movie genre, but it was also like still like early into its developing process. Like, I think it wouldn't be until The Avengers came out in 2012, which would be when superhero movies exploded into massive popularity. When the original Megamind first came out, there were only 3 MCU movies. The Dark Knight trilogy wasn't a trilogy yet, and the DCEU just didn't even exist yet. And then compare that to this movie, which is coming out next month, which it's 2024, and I've gotta say, they couldn't have chosen a worse time to release a Megamind 2. They had all this time to make a sequel, a follow-up to Megamind, and they chose to release it during a time when the superhero movie genre is fucking dying. Just absolutely perfect timing, if you ask me. And considering the fact that, again, it's highly unlikely that this movie is going to have any of the clever subversions that the first film had for the whole superhero genre, yeah, I have a small feeling this film might contribute just a little bit to superhero fatigue. That fresh, unique take on superheroes that the first film had, yeah, that's not gonna be in this. It's not gonna be in that influencer show either. I don't even know if that's still gonna be the plot for this show, because like I can't even imagine what that would be like. Man, I'm just disappointed with this, honestly. Megamind deserves better in so many ways. I would argue that Megamind deserved better from the very beginning. Like, when Megamind first came out, it should have been a big success. It should have been a bigger film for DreamWorks. It really should have been a flagship franchise for them. The fact that Trolls and Boss Baby both became franchises before Megamind is just insulting to me. It's even more insulting considering the fact that like the sequels for Trolls and Boss Baby are like theatrical quality when compared to this, which just feels like a cheap direct-to-video sequel from the mid-2000s. I get that Trolls 3 was the only one of these to be released theatrically, but the other 2 films were originally going to be released theatrically, however they weren't able to because of the pandemic, but they still have like a theatrical, high quality, high budget feel to them. They don't feel like cheap made for streaming services movies like this Megamind sequel does, and that's just really insulting to me, honestly. Megamind deserves better. Both of these movies deserve better. They deserve to have proper sequels. The fact that we had to wait over 10 years for both of these movies to get follow-ups, and for them to just be like this is just insulting. I'm sorry. Am I gonna watch this when it comes out? Yeah, I am. I mean, I'm obviously gonna sail the 7 seas when I watch it. I'm not gonna waste money on a subscription just to watch this. Like, it's not worth it at all. Will I make a follow-up video talking about the movie and my thoughts on it after watching it? Maybe. I might. I mean, I kind of feel like everything I said in this video regarding like why this just disregards the themes that the original Megamind had. Like, I feel like that would just be a repeat of that, everything that I said in this video, but maybe it could happen, a video on this movie. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, I am not looking forward to seeing a beloved childhood movie of mine get desecrated just like that. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Adios.